Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. So I just wanted to speak to you today and give you an update of the progress thus far in DV2023. It's important for us to look at where we are in the year and how KCC are doing with various aspects of progress, etc. How individual embassies are doing. Some of them, perhaps are doing worse than others. And just sort of understand, what our chances are, what the chances are for an individual, and what's going to happen also with the visa bulletin, etc. So that's what this video will be about. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, then please stay with me for the next few minutes and listen to the update that I've got for you. First, I also want to say, if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. And then you can think about hitting the like button or the hate button or whatever it is later on in the video as well. And, the engagement helps the channel. Anyway, so let's talk about the progress so far. So the first thing that's probably going to be on people's minds is DS260 processing. How's that going? I actually think that's going pretty well. I've heard now a couple of cases of people who submitted for the very first time in October and have had their DS260s processed. So there is evidence that those cases, at least up to October, have been processed. I'm not saying that every case submitted before October will have been processed, because as we know, or as we should know by now, there is a difference in times of processing between one case and another for various reasons, right? I've explained that before, and I hope that makes sense to you now. I hope that isn't a surprise. But that does mean that there could be some cases, some cases from July, August, September submissions that were not processed yet, and that's okay. They're getting close. The fact, though, that they've processed at least some from as late as October shows that the backlog is almost gone, and they're working through that. Now, there will be some cases that will take a bit longer to process, and they'll go on to be processed in February and March, etc. February, March, April, perhaps. It could be as late as that from cases already submitted. But for the majority of cases that have been submitted for the first time in in October, even November and December, those cases will be processed pretty soon now. So that means that there are plenty of cases for KCC to select from that are already current and have been processed, right? So we should talk about what that means in a minute. I also just want to address the unlocking thing. I've been consistent on my conversation about this for many years now, but let me just sort of reiterate what I've said before. Unlocking, we have got loads of evidence, loads of cases where people have unlocked their cases and been processed from all sorts of time periods. Like, it doesn't matter whether their case was processed already and then they unlocked and they had to have some reprocessing or whatever. There are lots of cases that have been unlocked and completed processing within the timescale that we would normally expect. And that suggests very strongly that they use the first date of submission for the order of the processing. That evidence is frankly just not up for dispute. I know some people still dispute it, but it's just overwhelming evidence, and it's illogical to think it could be any other way. But now, there are some people who have unlocked, as well as some people who have not unlocked, and that's the critical point there, who are still waiting for their case to process, despite the fact that they submitted fairly early, right? And some people therefore point at that and say, well, that's because I unlocked. Well, in general, no, it's probably not because you unlocked. It's possible it's because you unlocked, because if you unlock to do something very significant, like adding an adult derivative, a spouse or an adult child or something onto your case, then that could need some significant reprocessing, and that person that you just added, maybe that person has got a name that matches someone on the terrorism list, right? So that would cause a delay. Yes, I'm not saying that doesn't ever cause a delay, but it's rare that would cause a delay. And so unlocking in itself doesn't cause a delay. What will happen though is, just as some people have found, if they've submitted fairly early, their case needs longer to process. So it just takes longer, and for various reasons. And again, I've explained all of this in the past, many times actually. So okay, I hope that's clear. So DS260 processing, we're catching up. We're almost done with the backlog. They're doing very well with the processing. I don't think we can fault KCC at this point for what they're doing. They've done a pretty good job to this point. Then in terms of scheduling, they've scheduled about 27,000 people for interviews since the beginning of the year up until the end of March. Now, as I'm recording this today, it's the 2nd of February. I think there were some 2NLs released yesterday. I don't think there's been any more released today. There could be. I expect there might be some 2NLs for March interviews sent perhaps as late as the end of this week, which is tomorrow, or maybe even very early next week, right? But then the VB will be released, and the VB is a sign that the next month's 2NLs are going to be sent. So we're pretty close to the point where we can say, yeah, they've scheduled interviews up until the end of March. And that point is pretty much about now. There'll be a few more perhaps added to that. But they scheduled about 3,700 cases throughout the world, right? That's a pretty good number. Prior to last year, where we saw some extraordinary months that I'd never seen before, months of processing that just broke all the records. Prior to that, a 3,700 month would be pretty good. That would be a pretty strong showing. That's about, you'd think something around about 7,000 people were scheduled, last month, or for the month of March. That's pretty good. That's pretty strong. Like if you did 10 months like that, that's scheduling 70,000 people, right? And 70,000 people, funny enough, is about the pace they need to, or the number of cases they need to schedule in order to issue 55,000 visas, right? They need to schedule more people because some people won't show up for their interview. Some people will get refused to their interview, or their case will be refused. Some people will go on AP, 221G, which is commonly called administrative processing, or AP, and that will continue beyond the end of the year. So there are some cases that just won't make it, right? And so in order to get 55,000 visas issued, you have to schedule around about 70,000 people. So if they're scheduling 7,000 in a month, and we have 12 months in a year, they are more than adequately handling the pace we need them to handle, right? So so far they're at 27,000 people for half the year. That's a bit behind. That means that they were slow in October, November, December, but they always are. That's how things work. I mean, that's just the first few months of the year are always a bit slower because you've got holiday season and all sorts of stuff. You got Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year and Halloween, and all these holidays get in the way of work, frankly. And they get off to a slow start. They also have some tidy up work of the previous year, and they've got a lot more work to do in terms of DS260 submission in the first 3 or 4 months of the year. But where we get to the end of that backlog of DS260 processing, they have more staff that can work on scheduling cases, and they've got less of the DS260 processing work to do. So they tend to do more scheduling in the second half of the year, let's say, right? So from April onwards, we could see a slightly increased pace, but 3,700, 4,000 interviews a month, that's a good pace. We can't complain about that. So, okay, so nobody should be complaining, right? Well, no, not exactly. There are some people who are very entitled to be complaining right now. And those people, unfortunately, are at at some embassies, which last year I referred to as shit list embassies. And I'm afraid to say that we are starting to see a shit list forming this year as well. There are at least 4, probably 5 embassies that are restricting the number of interviews that they can handle in any given month, so that on a month-to-month basis, they're not clearing out their queue of people that are ready for scheduling. Okay, so just to explain what that means, let's say that there are 150 people or 150 cases, let's say, that have been processed, that are current and are lined up for a particular embassy. If that embassy only takes 75 people or 75 cases, then out of the 150 cases, they're only going to take 75. That means 75 of those are going to roll over to the following month, right? And what happens is an AV queue builds up. An AV status is a status which is the status at which you get assigned for interview. It's referred to as the letter number 4. If you've hung around in some of the forums, they call that letter number 4, and it means the point at which, if you ask KCC about your status, they will send you an email that says you are current for interview processing. Those specific words, current for interview processing. It's not just being current, it's being current and you've been processed and you've been allocated to that embassy. At that point, you're in a particular status, AV status, and there are a queue of cases in that same status at an embassy, which in normal times, they should be able to say, oh, the queue is 100 people, we'll take all 100 people, all 100 cases, we'll take them this month. But in the example I gave, if there's 150 cases and they restrict their capacity to only 75 cases, then there's going to be an overflow into the following month, right? And if they keep on doing that month to month, then that overflow, the backlog, builds up to a point where it can be some time before you get your interview. That's a problem. It's a problem that is developing at 4 embassies, and it really is. It's heartbreaking to see it. Let me just see here. I want to give you the embassies that I've noticed. There may be more than this, but these are the embassies that I've noticed are already in this situation. So Nairobi, Addis Ababa, Accra, Ankara, and Khartoum are all developing signs of that backlog, that AVQ backlog, where a lot of people are saying, I've received that letter number 4. I've received an email saying I'm current for interview processing, but that was 2 months ago and they haven't scheduled me. Why not? My case number is current, and people don't understand what's going on. That is happening in Nairobi. That is happening in Addis, Accra, Ankara, and Khartoum. And it may be happening at a couple of other embassies that I've not looked at, but it's happening at those 5. So these embassies, I'm afraid, need to make some changes pretty quickly. What they have to do is they have to say in the next couple of months, they have to say, okay, are we going to let these people just suffer and not take all the cases that that we should take? Or are we going to increase the capacity for DV lottery cases so that we can clear the backlog of cases? I don't know what they're going to do, right? KCC are not responsible to set the capacity at the embassies. The Department of State say they are not responsible to set the capacity at the embassies. Only the embassy can decide. And in previous years, where we've tried lawsuits, etc., to force an embassy to do something, they haven't done anything. No judge has told an embassy, you have to do this. Now, why are they doing this? Well, they're probably they will probably give us a story about the backlog of general immigration cases that built up during COVID times, and the fact that they're prioritizing other types of cases other than DV ahead of DV. And we're not going to get any sort of straight answers, but I can tell you, if this if this continues, what does it mean? Well, as you become current and as your case is processed, you are added to a queue at your embassy. And if there are many people in front of you, let's say there are 500 cases in front of you, and the embassy is only taking 50 cases per month, then it's going to take 10 months to work through that queue, and your chance will be lost. And it is literally as simple as that. They're just going to destroy the chances of some of the people. Now, what can you do about it? Can you switch embassy? Well, it's not so easy. Once you're in the AV queue, once you're in that status, KCC don't want you to switch. What they say, what their procedure is, what they prefer is, if you have, let's say you've moved to another country, they want to say, well, okay, we'll schedule you at your chosen embassy. And if you need to transfer, you can transfer between the embassies. So we'll send you to Nairobi and they'll transfer you. The problem is they're not going to send you to Nairobi because Nairobi is not taking enough cases, right? And so you're pretty much screwed. Now, the only real successful way, I shouldn't say the only, but generally the most successful way of getting a transfer and getting moved is, number one, before you go into an AV queue, right? Before you go into the queue of people in AV status at an embassy, do that before, if you can, and do that because you've changed addresses, you've moved to another country. Now, if you can't move to another country, and I don't want you to lie, but if you can't move to another country, you're going to find some pushback from KCC. They'll send you, you'll request, let's say you know that you're going to have a problem at Nairobi embassy. And so you say, okay, I want to move my case to Kuala Lumpur or wherever, right? And you email KCC innocently saying, please change my my embassy location. And you give them an answer because I want to, because whatever, right? You give them some sort of, they might ask you, why do you want to do that? And if you give them the wrong answer at that point, they're going to deny your request, right? Because they don't want to actually move the cases around that way. They believe that the cases local to an embassy should be interviewed at that embassy, and KCC put barriers up to try and stop that, right? Stop the moving, embassy shopping, as we call it. So unfortunately, it's a difficult time. Now, I have written an article about how you can change your embassy. I suggest you go and check that out at BritSimonSays.com. It gives you some information about how you can do it, but it's not a certainty that you will be able to do it. And some people have had good success by talking to an embassy that is prepared to accept you, right? So you discuss with some embassy that is quiet and is prepared to accept your case, and perhaps you've got some connection with that country. And if you get a positive response from that embassy, and they say they're prepared to take you, you can use that to talk to KCC and tell them to switch your case. It sometimes works, but not often. And as I mentioned, the best way is because you've moved to a country. You've moved to another country, right? Okay, so where are we at? We're making pretty good progress on DS260 processing. We're making pretty good progress on the number of cases that are being scheduled globally. Each region appears to be behaving relatively well, but in Africa in particular, there are several embassies and also Ankara in Europe that are causing problems, right? And so the feeling about how you feel the year is going won't be the same for everybody. Some people are very happy with how things are going because there are embassies that are working very well, but there's a few people at some more difficult embassies that are going to have a different experience. Hopefully that will get better, but having tried to make that better through various means, through Twitter hashtag wars and through lawsuits and through trying to contact embassies and putting comments on their Facebook pages and that sort of thing, I can tell you that nothing at this point has encouraged a specific embassy to do something where they were just determined not to do something, right? We had, for example, Sydney last year just did nothing until I think about June of last year, did absolutely nothing. Thankfully, Suva Embassy took up some of the slack and helped out there, partly because of the lawsuit, I believe, that Jesse Bless filed against Sydney Embassy, and Suva got to hear about that, and so they helped out. And then magically, at some point, Sydney just opened the doors, and I think it was in June or July, and started taking a few cases and finished off the year. And so in the end, it worked out okay for people at Sydney Embassy, but it was a close-run thing. Meanwhile, at other embassies such as Nairobi and Accra and so on, there was not such good news, right? There was lots of people that just lost their chance because of the embassy. And the slightly sort of hurtful and unfair thing is that the rest of the world will continue to use those visas, even if an embassy says, I got 3,000 people lined up at my door that are ready to be, ready to be interviewed, but I'm not going to interview them. Those 3,000 people will lose their chances, and other people will take those visas. There are no visas that are reserved for a specific country, right? The rest of the world or the rest of the region will just continue to take those visas and say thank you very much, right? And if the population affected by those non-performing embassies is large enough, it will actually change the visa bulletin number, and it could actually give some help to higher case numbers in the same region, but at better performing embassies, right? So this is a fact of DV lottery life. It's not a successful, happy process for everybody at the moment. There are going to be some winners and some losers, and unfortunately, the embassies have control over much of that outcome. All right. Now, there is a specific way to identify an embassy that has a backlog and is not performing well. It's a bit complex, and so I think it demands another video to explain how to do that, and I'll record that video shortly, so that you can check out the data of your own embassy to see whether your own embassy is performing well or not. So you can definitely look at that, but but for now, just in terms of the progress report, where we stand is pretty good for most people, pretty much a normal year for most people, and then badly affected for people at a small number of embassies. So I'm hoping that will get better, along with my throat. Okay, so that's where we stand. I hope that's useful and interesting to you. I'll get this video uploaded as soon as possible, and then I'll start working on another video that will explain how to figure out whether your particular embassy is performing well or not, because that's important, and it will tell you, roughly speaking, how long you can expect to wait at your particular embassy, except for those embassies that are being super restrictive about the number of interviews that they take. Where really I can't tell what's going to happen. And I'm talking about Addis and Nairobi and so on. I can't tell what's going to happen. I don't know what they're going to do. Are they going to suddenly release the floodgates and take lots of interviews? I hope they don't. I hope they do something. Something is better than nothing. But delaying everything until the last minute is not a good strategy. It's bad for various reasons. So it would be far better if they would increase their capacity now rather than later. Okay. All right, everybody. I hope that's useful to you anyway. Thanks for watching, and look out for the next video. All right. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.